Hi guys, today we're looking at a Fed 3B. This cost me $65 on eBay. It comes with an Industar 52mm f2.8 lens. Their current value on eBay right now is about $60 plus shipping. The condition of this one is, I will say, in like new condition. The personal significance of this is I can't afford a Leica M3, and the Russian Fed 3 cameras closely resemble Leicas from 10 feet away. The quality is obviously not there, but online you can find these in new condition with your choice of colors of the covering. Mine is a nice deep red burgundy, a very pretty camera. The historical significance is these were made from 1966 to 1980. The cost in 1966 was 16 rubles. I actually find that hard to believe, but when I tried to figure out what 16 rubles were worth in 1966, it came out to $16, but the exchange rate wasn't something that floated in those days. The Fed 3 is a Ukrainian 35mm rangefinder camera that was modeled on the classic Leicas. Over 2 million were produced between 66 and 1980, whereas Leica only produced 225,000 M3s. The Fed factory in Markov was an orphanage turned into a work commune and was named for Felix E. Dzhirinsky, that's the FED part, the founder of the original Soviet secret police. Some of the features of the Fed 3B, and this is common with many of the Soviet era cameras, is the shutter must be cocked before the shutter speed is altered, otherwise you will damage it. It also has a diopter correction ring around the viewfinder, and it uses standard 35mm thread mount. On the front of the camera we have the self timer, and this is the self timer release button. So right now it's set for a 500th of a second. If we set the self timer and press the button, it should go off in a second. And above that is the PC sync connector for flash, the rangefinder window, and the viewfinder. And then that's it. On the lens is 39mm standard Leica thread mount. LTM they call them. And you can take the lens off simply by spinning it counterclockwise a little bit. That little lever is what changes the rangefinder window for focusing. Give it a snug turn. This is the focus ring from 1 meter to infinity. There's your depth of field preview scale. And here's where you set the aperture from f22 to f2.8. And you can see it if you can see down into the lens there. I'll leave it at f2.8. On the top of the camera, we have the rewind knob. It doesn't pull out or anything. A cold shoe. This is the shutter speed dial. And remember the warning, always cock before setting the shutter speed. It's at a 500th of a second now. I'll cock it. To change the shutter speed, you lift it up and turn it slightly, and you'll feel it fall into a hole, a little peg. So now it's at 250th. Here's 125th. And like the previous Leica or Leica lookalike that I looked at, you'll notice that the shutter speeds, as they decrease in speed, they get closer and closer together. And that has to do with the non-linear arrangement of the focal plane shutter. Now what In addition to cocking it first before you set the shutter speed, what I have to warn you about is as you approach these real slow shutter speeds, like a half a second and 1 second, there's no resistance when you turn this shutter speed dial until you get to, in this case, 1/15 of a second. Then you can feel the resistance. You can feel you're actually winding a spring. And if I set it to the 2 second mark, it falls into a detent. Here's a 2 second. I'm sorry, a half a second shutter speed. And if I have to cock it first, and if I try to set it to 1 second, there, it's set for 1 second. Now what's tempting is you can go to 30 and B, but if you turn it counterclockwise, you will damage the shutter. In fact, you will cause it to jam. And in fact, I jammed this and I had a heck of a time unjamming it. I'll show you some pictures. I took it apart to figure out how to unjam it. I eventually unjammed it by actually grabbing the focal plane shutter and forcing it to move, which is not a good thing to do. Here's me tearing this thing apart, trying to figure out how to unjam it. Eventually, I just grabbed the focal plane shutter with my fingers and pushed it sideways. So I'm going to set this back to a knife save speed. There's a 250th of a second. Now to get to B, you have to go this way. You can't go the other way. You have to go clockwise to B. So there's really two warnings with this shutters. Always cock it first and never go between 1 second and 30 up to B. You have to go clockwise to get to the 30th of a second. There's B. Now if I want to go to a 30th of a second, again you go clockwise to the detent. And here's a 30th of a second. Again, I'll cock it and I'll raise it and go counterclockwise and go back to a reasonable shutter speed like a 250th, which is something we probably use all day, every day. So there's two warnings on the shutter. Always cock it and never go counterclockwise past 1 second. Always go clockwise if you want to get to the 30th. Now the 30th of a second over there is the only sync speed for flash, and that's why it's over there separate to enable the flash syncing. The sync connector on the front is not wired to a fancy releaser connector someplace. It's a mechanical thing, and so they have an extra detent in the shutter so that that can get activated. Okay, to the right now we have the shutter release button, and you'll notice as I cock it, there's a label here, B and C. That's Cyrillic lettering, so I don't know what the B and C actually stands for, but C is the normal operation mode, and B you could think of as back, and that's how you would rewind your film. To rewind the film, you turn it clockwise and push down, and it releases the sprocket so that you can crank the film on backwards. Now, if you had just loaded the film, you have to manually reset the film counter by turning this, and it turns fairly easy. So I'll set it here to 0. And then the other knurled knob on the top is where you set your reminder of what type of film you have. These three little indicators on top, the one with the sun represents color film and daylight. The little light bulb represents color film with artificial light, and the little circle with the red dot means black and white film. So you would turn that, depending on, it's just a film reminder, it doesn't change any setting. So if you were outside taking pictures with color film, or the picture of the sun, and your ISO speed was, say, 250th, you would in fact turn the dial like that, so 250 lines up. Now these numbers, and you'll notice it's labeled ROCT, which is Cyrillic lettering, which is very strange stuff. In English, it would be GOST, like ghost, and that was a Russian standard for many years. It's not equivalent, but it's very close to ASA or ISO settings. So again, that's just a reminder dial for your film speed. And since there's no built-in meter here, you use an external meter anyhow, it probably doesn't matter. On the sides of the camera, there is nothing. There are no strap lugs on this camera. You have to have a leather case for it or carry it bare. On the camera back, we only have the viewfinder. This little knurled knob, though, is actually a diopter adjustment, and you can look through it and turn it left and right until you see where it focuses good for your eye. And for mine, it focused properly right about in the middle. On the bottom, there's a standard 1/4 by 20 tripod socket, and there's 2 release levers, one on the left and one on the right, and they both turn in opposite directions. So to open the back, you would flip these guys up, and you turn one clockwise and the other one counterclockwise, and the back comes off like that. It's a pretty easy film load. In this one, we actually have a slotted take-up spool. Some of the other Fed 3s actually had a removable spool, but this one is super easy. So the film goes across the film plane, past the sprockets, stick it through the slot, and as you wind it, the mechanism turns this way, so it tucks the film underneath. So I'll just slide that back on. And again, these two turn in opposite directions. They didn't make it easy, and there's no arrows there to show you which way they go. Beautiful camera, seems to work fine, and like I said, be careful on the shutter speed. You can jam it and it'll be very frustrating. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.